Okay, so for those of you who have no idea what After Effects is and have never used it, it is animation and compositing software primarily for video and film. I'd like to sort of refer to it as the Photoshop of film and moving pictures. I don't think any lecture or demonstration on After Effects taking place in this room would be complete without starting with this.
Hello, did you know you could use Smile & Steve's prescription refill app to order your refills right on your phone, and you'll get real-time updates on the status of your order.
It's like having a little Smile & Steve in your pocket.
So I was a little laggy, but not too bad. But so After Effects is, it's primarily animation. It's compositing, which is basically, you know, some doing green screen work, drawing things on the stuff, having stuff move around the frame. It's an Adobe product, so it integrates really well with Premiere. There are a lot of things, if you edit with Premiere, there are a lot of things inside of Premiere that you can do inside of After Effects, but it's sort of like Premiere is capable of doing like maybe 20, it's that old 80-20 rule. Premiere is capable of doing maybe what 20% worth of After Effects is going to do, but you'll probably be able to use Premiere 80% of the time. So if you're editing inside there and a lot of keyframing, motion graphics, moving things around, there's a lot of stuff that you can do, say like inside an editing environment like Vegas, like Premiere and those things. But After Effects just sort of adds a whole bunch more functionality. So this is all, most of this is green screen work. Some of it is, what we call practical effects, which is that he actually was there. So for instance, this is not an effects shot at all. Mike is actually standing on top of the Mead building, and I'm shooting it from down below. So it's a sort of mixture of doing a couple things. This is, that's a practical effect, which basically means that he's standing still at the top of the Mead building. I'm shooting over his shoulder, and I just added in this sort of fake wire using After Effects. But the way that After Effects layers things, I had to mask out the pole in the foreground to make it look like the pole was in front of the wire. So you can do what is called motion tracking inside of After Effects and motion masking. So if you were to see this as an After Effects project, you would have one layer here, which is the background plate of the entire thing happening. And then you have another layer here, which is the line that I just drew inside of After Effects. And then you have another layer on top of that, which is basically just the pole. I can take the background layer, duplicate it, put it on top, and then mask out the area of the pole to make it look like it's layered like this. This was literally shot standing right here, so I'm standing on top of the Mead building. I get a background plate, just me standing on top of the roof, looking straight down with my camera. And the rest of this, I got a big black wire. I think it was that one right there that is running that scoop light. And I put my green screen down on the floor and ran the wire on top of the green screen and had Mike hold the camera like this and then like tightrope walk on the wire on the green screen. And then composited the green screen with the background plate and threw the background plate out of focus a little bit. So that was actually shot by Mike. And then this one here, he's actually standing in the garage, standing on some scaffolding, and I'm way down like this, as low as I can possibly get. We shot on the same day, so the sky was similar blue sky. So there's a very soft edge mask around the back side of him here to sort of try to match and color correct the two blues together. And then what I do is I just mask out the scaffolding tiny, and then shrink him way small down. and set him on top of there so it looks like he's kind of walking across. And then this is the exact same, the other one, and then all these were just actually shot right on top of the building. There's no effect shot here, it's just a matter of mixing in the effect shots with the practical shots. And then this is a motion track of putting screen and Steve inside of his phone. So he's holding the phone, and I'm just using After Effects to track the four corners of the phone and then insert Steve into the phone. And then all this is still motion track, and that's about it. So After Effects is used by a lot of things. It is, I talked about being, good for effects work. Primarily, a lot of it is motion graphics, kinetic typography, which is, a lot of motion graphics, moving text around, bouncing from one spot to the next. So these things, these kinetic typography type things, these animations, these just have After Effects written all over them. So this is the type of thing that you could accomplish inside of AE. This one will be pretty obvious what the After Effects shot is.
Hi, I'm Smiling Steve. If you're juggling around your meds, your vitamins, your nutritional supplements, you're probably asking yourself, when do I take them? Which ones do I take? It can be a real hassle.
So, After Effects will automatically add motion blur, which is something like inside Premiere doesn't do. So if you're moving an object around inside of After Effects and moving on, it'll automatically add motion blur based on the direction that it's going. So it can be used for, animation, special effects like that. I've used it for fixing problems. You ever hear fix it in post? That's what After Effects does. Here's a fun game of find the After Effects.
This guy didn't. She got 3 years of maintenance, lifetime state inspections, oil changes, and the best price, period. He didn't. She also got roadside assistance, towing, and a lot more, up to a $3,000 value on us. He came up empty-handed.
Anybody see it? So when we originally shot this, this box said free towing. And the Attorney General really frowns on people saying free in car dealer commercials. So nothing can be free. She really is catching the box. Yeah, so we have somebody, so this is a white seamless that ends right above her head. And then we've got somebody standing up above her on a ladder.
And her hair was actually blowing.
Yeah, so there's somebody standing up above her on a ladder, and we're playing the voice track in the background while the production assistant is dropping one box at a time. So he basically has a stack of 4 boxes, and he's like, let go, let go, let go. And so yeah, she's really dropping it, but the problem was that the sticker that they had printed for this said free towing. We showed this to their legal department, and they said you can't have the word free in there. So basically what I had to do was, again, do a motion track on it as the box is falling, and then motion track this box too, and then replace the text, using Photoshop and adding some noise inside the image, so that it no longer says free. So I'm just basically, some of it is hand track, and you can see that there it's a little sketchy. The text is actually, whoops. So the text box is actually a little bigger than the box itself, and some of that is because After Effects will add a motion blur as the thing is falling. So so After Effects is adding that motion blur onto my Photoshop graphic. So there you go. So there's, just a couple quick samples of what we can do in After Effects. Let's talk real quick about the basics of how you run it. So this is just the original, the opening splash screen. Hi, welcome here, and I'm just going to create a new project. By the way, every other semester I teach this class. I teach a motion graphics and animation course over at Castleton. So I'm going to try to cram an entire semester's worth of information into the next 40 minutes, ish, sort of. So stop me if I go way too fast, or talk to me afterwards, or whatever you want to do. So I'm gonna kind of blow through just some real quick examples and samples of how it works, because it's sort of like once you kind of understand where the buttons are and when you press them and how you press them, it's not that much of a difference between what I'm going to do now and those F-150 commercials, other than a lot of patience and a lot of time. Exaggerating a little bit, but not much. Sort of once you understand what you need to do, and you have the patience to do it, you can accomplish a wonderful thing in here. So I'll just go ahead and hit new composition, and this is where you want to define the parameters of your movie. So here you have the size, 1920 by 1080, which is an HD frame, pixel aspect ratio, frames per second. Full resolution, the start time code that you're going to go with in 0, and then the duration of your animation or your shot. Really, the only thing you need to concern yourself with is, if you're using an HD frame, and really the duration. And you don't really need to change the duration, other than don't make it shorter than what your shot is. I guess is the sort of best way to describe that. The one thing you want to sort of keep in mind is that After Effects is not at all an editing program. It's not like Premiere or Vegas or Final Cut. You don't do any editing inside Premiere, or inside After Effects rather. You basically bring in shot by shot, do all your effects inside of After Effects, render out your shots, then bring them into your editing platform of choice as sort of finished shots. There are really fancy things you can do inside Premiere, like take a clip, send it to After Effects, create your composition in After Effects, hit save, and it automatically round trips back into Premiere again. But I'm not here to talk about integration like that. So I'll just call this my Statue of Liberty demo. Maybe. And there you go. So this is my project window right here. So this is, this is where my raw footage, my Photoshop files, my graphic files, my Illustrator files. This is where all my source material lives. This is my composition window right here. So this is where I'll be building whatever effect that it is in the composition. And then this is my timeline. So very similar to an editing timeline. Where you've got your time marker indicator here, and you just scroll along the time like this. So obviously I need some raw footage to work with. So I'll hit import, Command I, like so. Or if you want, you could just switch over here to the Finder. And I'll go to my drive, and I will bring in motion graphics. Peg samples, Statue of Liberty project. I've got here an I Love New York.Photoshop document. I've got a movie of the Statue of Liberty, and then I've got an Illustrator file that says Visit New York. So I can just drag those into my project window like that, or I could have just hit the import button and selected them right off my drive. So now what I can do is, so here is my movie of my Statue of Liberty, and I can drag that right into my composition window like this, or I can drag it down into my timeline. One of the nice things about dragging it down to the timeline is that it automatically will center the movie into your thing. Now, I'm a little surprised that I'm not really seeing anything right now. Oh, there you are. So this is, so this clip here is a little over 8 seconds. So here I am at 0. I can scroll through here. This is the 8 seconds, and that's the end of my video clip. So this Statue of Liberty video clip that I brought in is only 8 seconds long. And so now what I can do is I can say, for instance, bring in my my I Love New York.PSD file. So this is a Photoshop document. And ta-da, there it is, and I drag that in. If I were to open this up inside Photoshop, it would have no background to it. So you can see that it actually has no background to it. So After Effects will bring in Photoshop files natively, whatever effects, titles, generators, whatever you have inside, you can bring them into After Effects. And then I can also bring in, I've got an Illustrator file that I just typed up in Illustrator. I made an Illustrator file that just says visit New York like this, and it's all vector-based and inside of Illustrator, so I can resize it all. I have no idea what I just did. There we go. Choose over here and choose fit. There we go. So now you can see down here in my timeline area, I have down here at the bottom my Statue of Liberty movie. I've got my I Love New York, and I've got my Visit New York Illustrator file, and they are layered in that same way on the screen. So whatever is on the bottom of your timeline is on the bottom of your composition, or farthest away from you, I guess, if you're thinking about how something layers on top of each other. So for instance, I can take my I Love New York with the heart and then drag it up, and it will become in front of the other text like that, and then move it around. Now, well, let's see, I want to keep that back in front. That looks much better like that. So now if you look in the timeline, I have these little drop-down arrows next to every layer. So I will, for example, take my drop-down layer like this with the I Love New York, and you can see that I've got a transform option right there, and I will dial that one down, and you can see that now I have properties for anchor point, position, scale, position, and opacity. I'm sorry, rotation and opacity. So the anchor point is the point at which around that layer moves. So right now it's set there. Here's my position in space, X, Y. So how far left, right, and up and down is it? And scale is at 100% right now, and then rotation and opacity. And you can see that if I move these around, so if I come over here and change the scale to say like 50%, it's going to be 50%. And I can either move things around like this, and you can see that my position indicator is moving. My position numbers are moving, or I come down to this window here, position, and move things around just by dragging on that number there. So if I want to constrain something to only move in the X direction, or only move in the Y direction, I can actually grab those numbers. Or if I want to be real fancy, I can just double click on there and just type in the number if I know exactly where I want it to be. So now you can see that, you know, the clouds are moving, and the reason the clouds are moving is because this is a movie. But, you know, we're here to animate things because this is, after all, After Effects. And here's the magic button for that, is this tiny little clock, or the stopwatch that is next to the property that I want to animate or change. So, for instance, if I want this I Love New York thing to float from left to right or top to bottom, I need to set what are called keyframes. So I'm going to go back to my time 0, which is the very beginning, and I'm going to say I want to animate the position. So I'm going to click on the stopwatch, and now you can see the stopwatch right here is blue, which means that that property is going to animate over time, and it has added a keyframe right here. So this little blue diamond is a keyframe for that object. So now I'm going to move forward in time. I'll move forward to 8 seconds or so, and I will set a new keyframe, and I'll just have this drop down. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to take the Y property and drop it down to there. So now you can see that it added this motion path right here. So in other words, basically what's going on is that I've set I'm so used to using 2 monitors. I was trying to get my mouse to scoot over to this monitor here. I've set a keyframe right here. So at this point in time, at 7 seconds and 22 frames, this object is here. At 0 frames, the object is, well, you remember I set it up there at 0. And now what After Effects is going to do is it's going to tween. It's going to tween between the two, which I guess is redundant. So it's going to take those 2 keyframes and then figure out where it's supposed to be at every frame between the 2. So it's tweening between these 2 keyframes. So just like traditional cell animation, where the animator will give the assistant, you know, like I want him to be here, and then at the other point over here, you know, Walt Disney will draw 2 frames and then hand it over to somebody else and say, now you draw every frame in between. So that's what the tweening is it's calculating where it should be between every frames. And you can see right now that the only property that's being animated is the position. So I can animate multiple properties over time. So for instance, I can come over here and I'll have it start like this, but I'll animate the scale like this, and then like maybe halfway through the animation, I'll have it scale up big, like this, and then maybe toward the end, I'll scale it back down small. So I'll set another keyframe here, and then scale this back down small, like this. So that now you can see I've got my position is still the same, but now my scale actually has 3 keyframes to it. One that starts big, and then it hits that keyframe, and then goes back down small into the scale property. So you can do, you can animate all of those things. Basically, any property that has a stopwatch can be animated over time, which is really any property at all. So including, rotation and opacity. So if I wanted it to start out at 0%, like this, you can see now if I press play, it's never there because I'm not animating the opacity value at all. It's staying at 0. So what I want to do is be sure to animate the opacity. Maybe it starts at, like 20%. Come in here, starts at 20%, comes up to 100, and then back down to 0 as it goes down. So basically, anytime you're parked somewhere and change a value here, it's going to automatically add a keyframe. So it automatically adds a keyframe for whatever property you're doing. So there you go. And they can all be kind of animated, independently of each other. So if I wanted this, if I want to do the rotation, like a quick rotation right in the middle, I can start here and I can animate the rotation. And then at this point here, I can have it go 2 rotations and 0 degrees. So that's going to be a very fast flip when it gets there. Fascinating. So now all of these different layers can be, one can be added one on top of the other. You can change how they relate to each other. One can go in front, one can go behind. And it's really just the same thing over and over and over again of opening up the properties for whatever that layer is, opening up, for instance, the transform properties, and animating these guys here. So I did say that just about any property that you can add onto anything that you can add or anything you can do inside of this can be animated. So for instance, maybe with this Visit New York graphic right here, I'll come up and add an effect to it. And maybe I'll just add a like a gauze and blur or something like that. There you are. And when I do that, there's an effect property up here, window, and I can add the blur to it. I could do, say, like example of just a vertical only blur, like this. And now you can see that actually up here in my effect window, I have the stopwatches. So I can go over here, and now you can also see that down here, now that I've added an effect onto that layer, I now have an effects line item underneath my Visit New York layer, and again I can just dial that down, and also show me the effects, dial down the gauze and blur, and maybe I want to animate the blurriness over time. So I will start this right here, very blurry, have it be the vertical property, and then in 3 seconds, go down to 0 blurriness. Fancy. So any property that you can pull out, all of the effects that are in here, the keying, the audio, you can do some audio mixing inside of here. All of the effects that are inside of After Effects. They've got distortions and twists and twirls and bulges and moves and stuff like that. All that can be sort of animated over time. The trick is you just find the stopwatch, and you can actually click it up here too. The stopwatch is in this control panel also, and then change it over time. So After Effects has always been what they refer to as a 2D animation software. So there are 3D animation programs, like the guys at Pixar use to make Toy Story and all those movies, where you actually create 3D models and do animation in 3D space, 3D animation. So After Effects has always been a 2D a 2D animating platform. There's no 3D properties inside of After Effects. But wait, there's more. After Effects does do 3D in a 2D environment. So what does that mean? Well, let's look at what you can do inside of After Effects if you're talking about doing 3D work. So a long time ago, I was given this image here to put into a TV commercial for Castleton. And, it happens a lot that somebody will give me, someone will give me like, oh, we want to do a TV commercial with a bunch of still photos. Yawn. So, how do you make that, more interesting? Well, what I did with this thing here and sort of describe how this is a two-dimensional program in a 3D world is that if you remember down here inside of After Effects, for instance, this I Love New York piece right here is a two-dimensional layer. I only have X, Y position. I can either move it X or Y. But if I click this tiny little box right here, which you can see these are all the switches for different layers, this one on the far right converts it to a 3D layer. So if I click this box right here, that now becomes a 3D layer, and you can see that I now have my position, anchor point, position, scale, orientation, and rotation, now have X, Y, and Z values. So now I can actually move things in 2D space in 3 dimensions. X, Y, and then Z would be closer to the virtual camera that's in the shot. And I can rotate it. But the one thing to keep in mind is that everything inside of After Effects is still a 2-dimensional object. So, if I take this is obviously a flat piece of artwork, but if I come over here and rotate it on the Y-axis, it's going to be still completely flat. Nothing in After Effects actually has physical depth to it. It doesn't extrude out the depth piece of it. It's not entirely true, but for the purpose of today, it is. So now I've got the 3D space. So let's go back to my Dave Walk thing, which was, what can you do with this image? Well, what I did with this image is that I brought the image into Photoshop, and the first thing that I had to do was I wanted to isolate all the different parts and pieces of this image. So this column here, this girl, Dave, and this other student, and then also the background part. And I wanted to have them all be complete objects. Well, I couldn't really get the background part because they're standing in front of it, and that would be a Photoshop nightmare to, go try to recreate this door. And you'll see why this is important in a second. So, I'm lucky enough that I actually know where this photo was taken, and I'm there twice a week. So I went and just took this photo. So I took that photo. Somebody else took the other photo from before. So I had kind of a nice clean background plate. So now if I go into Adobe Photoshop, you can see that I isolated all these layers. And so I have a, let's take all these off. I have the photo that I took. I've got this, what I call right girl. So she is on a separate layer all by herself. I have this one called left girl. I've got this one called Dave, and then I got this kid on the right. And then I've got the left column, boom, which is sitting there. So I drop that in, and then I've got this thing called right column, which I think I just made up. I don't think that really exists. I think I just took left column and duplicated it so that I could add some more depth to the image. So now what I'm able to do, since After Effects is a 3D animation program in a 2D world, so real quick, I'm just going to do I won't do a great job of this, but I'm going to do import file in here, bring in the Photoshop document, and I'm going to import this as a composition. Sure, let's see what happens. So basically what it is, I brought in my Photoshop file as a After Effects composition. So it actually retained all of my layers that I showed you in Photoshop. And what I'm going to do is actually convert all of these layers to a 3D layer like this. I'm going to come over here and I'm going to look at the positioning of all these things like this. I'm going to say that here I am in Z space for the background of the Woodruff Hall area. That Z space is 0. So we'll pretend that that is the farthest thing away from me because that's what it is. I've got this right girl. So she would be in front of Woodruff a little bit. And you can see that if I change her number to be greater than 0, she's actually back behind. I'm actually taking her by changing her Z-space and putting her behind a layer that's there. So I want to change this to a negative number to bring her closer. So we'll bring her to say like minus 400. This girl next to her is in front of her. So I'm going to make this like minus 600 in space. Dave is probably behind all of them. So I'll put Dave at, say, like minus 200. And this kid on the right is probably standing in line with this girl on the left. So we will call him at minus 600 in Z space as well. And these two columns are really close to my camera. So we'll call those at minus 1,000. And this right column also probably the same at minus 1,000. So the trick is that I can now add a virtual camera to this scene, layer, new camera. And I can set up the type of camera that it is and just the OneNote camera. So now you can see that I now have a camera sort of set up in my scene. And now you kind of have to imagine what this camera is looking at. If you were to picture this from the top, I've got, Woodruff, student, Dave, student, column, camera. And if my camera moves, I'm going to fake the perspective on that camera move. So if I sort of imagine that I'm here and I'm doing the camera here and you're way behind her, still in 2D space, if I were to rotate you, you'd be paper thin. So if I move like this, I'm going to get that sort of perspective shift. And that's kind of the cool thing that this camera move here will do, is that if I come over here and I animate this camera position over time in the X dimension, I probably need to go a little more aggressive with my dimensions. But what you can start to see is you get what's called a parallax effect, which is, for instance, this girl here on the left is not at all, she's barely touching the window, but as my camera moves, she's covering up more of the window. And it kind of gives you that 3D effect. Now, if I wanted to make that more obvious, what I probably should have done is gone much bigger with these numbers here. So like, for instance, this girl on the left, what I can do actually is make her much bigger like this, reposition her in the frame where I want her, and then maybe change her scale property. So I'm shrinking her down, but bringing her closer to the camera. So I'm making her smaller, bringing her closer to the camera, which makes her the same size as she normally would be. So now let's see if that parallax effect is more pronounced. Yeah, for sure. So now you can actually see, now as you move the camera left to right, you can actually start to see the, the other stuff that's kind of around there. So she tends to look like she's moving. So at the same time, I could take my camera and I could animate the position over time in an X direction. So I can start my camera over here, and you can see that it's actually starting to reveal some of this window on the right-hand side. And maybe I can also animate my camera's rotation. X rotation? Yes. No, not X rotation. Y. So like this. We'll animate the position, and then at some point in time, the camera will move right like this, but at the same time, turn that direction there. So basically what I'm doing is I'm taking a virtual camera and I'm changing the rotation so it's faced like this, and then over time the camera, I'm actually animating a virtual camera to do this move right here, which will give, hopefully, a much nicer parallax effect. A very slow render parallax effect. But there you go. Now there gets to be a point where my background is not big enough to pull this off. You got to remember this is just a photograph that's sitting in space, and now my camera is shooting at a wider angle than that. So the fix for that is to just take this background image and not move it in space, but scale it up a tiny little bit, like maybe 110%. So now it's not moving, it's not going to ruin that parallax effect. But ta-da, there you go. Michael Bay, look out. So there's two different kinds of tracking inside of After Effects. There's motion tracking and there's camera tracking. So with motion tracking, you can take, for instance, a specific object in a frame and try to track its position over time and match something to that. So for example, I will take this layer here and I'll double click on this layer and I'll come over here to the tracker and I will do track motion like this, and that will give me a track point that I can track a certain location. So as I zoom in, so I'm going to find something that is, relatively high contrast, like this area here. And if I zoom in on this, so what this means is that this is the point that I want to track in my video. This is what it's going to look for. And this square here is where it's going to look. So it's trying to find in the next frame. So in the next frame, it's going to search this outside area. So obviously, the smaller this is, the faster the track is going to happen. The bigger this is, the slower, but maybe the more precise. Especially if you've got something moving really fast, you need to have the search area be relatively big. I know that if I just go frame by frame with this, this is not moving very fast. So what I will do is I will try to do and also that point that I chose is in the frame most of the time. So I'll only do a little bit of this. Where's something that's in the frame almost all the time? Let's start up here. Let's actually track. Let's track this point up top. So I'll try tracking that point there, and I will just come over here and I will hit Analyze Forward. It's doing a pretty good job up until right about now. It's not going to know what to do now. So this now I have a motion track like this, and now for instance I could make another layer that is a text layer. Building. We'll get really creative here. So now if I go to this, this motion track and I go to my tracker palette here and I say edit target, I want to apply this motion track to this point that I tracked right here. I'll target it to that title that I just did, which is building. I'll hit OK, and then it's going to ask, what do I want to do? And I'll, that's not it. And then I'll just hit apply. Track type, transform, position. I can either transform the position or the rotation and the scale. This is a single point track, so I can only track the position, and I'll just hit apply. Apply in X and Y dimension. So now it has taken that point that if you remember, I tracked this little point right here in the building, and that happens to be the anchor point of this layer right here. So the upper left-hand corner of this layer, which is here, is now automatically. So basically what After Effects just did is it just added all the keyframes. So if I look at my position property, you can see it automatically added all the keyframes to track that motion in there. And once that thing that I was tracking left the frame, it doesn't know what to do with it, so I don't have any of those extra frames. So that's motion tracking. You know, you see this a lot on TV where you got the guy like jogging down the road and the little graphic next to him or the little text message that comes in is bouncing along with his head, so they're motion tracking on like his ear or something like that, or they'll put something on his shirt that they paint out later with a big plus sign, and they'll track him as he's running, and he'll, you know, they can get that motion moving around. So that's that's motion tracking. The other kind of tracking that After Effects will do is called camera tracking. Now this is similar. So I'm going to take this building layer, I'm going to turn it off, I'm going to go to my city flyover, I'm going to double click on it, I'm going to come over here and say track camera. I'm going to go back to my composition. So what After Effects is doing now is it's actually making many point tracks in space and looking for areas that it can track sort of like, you know, all by itself. So basically it automatically found a whole bunch of point tracks like this, found things that were in the frame and tried to track them over time. It might fool it a little bit because some of these cars are moving, but this building here should be pretty solid. And what it's actually doing is computing the space that the camera would move virtually based on this footage right here. So it's looking at that footage, calculating the perspective shift and how it's moving, and then creating a virtual camera in the same way that I showed with the Dave Walk demo as I was animating the camera. So what After Effects just did with the camera track is it tried to decipher where this camera was physically moving in space in order to get this shot, and then it can add that camera. So let's see, track camera like this. So what I will do with this is I'll find 3 points that I think are probably about where I want them, and I can look at the sort of quality of my track, and it seems pretty good. It's staying pretty solid. It's adding some points every now and then in space. But what I can do now is, for instance, I can add, I'll just triangulate like 3 of them, like this one, and I'll shift click this one, and I'm going to go with this one, and this one. To sort of triangulate those 3 things in space, and then I will right-click on this, and I will do create solid, create a null. Create a solid and a camera. That's what I'll do. So what After Effects just did is it created a solid in that space. So this solid object is just a rectangle that's sitting in space. And then I've got a camera that is my virtual camera right here, my 3D track camera. So this, if you can wrap your brain around this, and I've got a lot of problems doing that a lot, is a flat piece of video, but and this isn't moving at all, not moving in space. This isn't moving in space, but what After Effects has done is put an object in that point in space and then move the camera around so that this thing isn't moving, this isn't moving, but the camera that's moving is showing this one is being moving. How's that for an example? That was awful. But now what I can do is I can bring in some Photoshop damage like this. This is my Michael Bay thing. So this is a little Photoshop thing. Can I actually show you this? Yeah, so it's basically a Photoshop thing of just the building damage. And now if I option drag my building damage to on top of my solid, whoops, I have to select the solid first. Option drag that on top of this here like that. Boom. And then obviously I'm going to want to take this and then change its rotation property. Move it around in space here, move it around in X space. I'd have to do some pretty serious color correction to that. So I could come in here to Effect and color correction. Let's make this quick and easy. Yeah, something like that. So basically what I can do is I now take, an image like this and maybe make that a little bigger. So take that damage and just scale it up quite a bit like so. Maybe move it over to the side. Yeah, now if I want to get really fancy, I could take this damage layer like this, I could duplicate it, make it a little bit smaller, and then move it back in Z space. And I should probably rotate it around so it doesn't look like the exact same thing. Let's see. And maybe scale it down a little bit more. Now in theory, if I move this backwards in Z space, and maybe make this one a little bit darker, because it's inside the building, right? I don't know. Am I getting any perspective shift on that? I don't think I am. Not what I meant to do. Yeah, I can't tell if that's adding any of the, like you're actually seeing inside the building or not.
Looks good.
Maybe a little bit. Not too bad. So, not a bad effect for 5 minutes. I don't know. There you go. So, long story short, if you want to throw somebody on the top of the Mead building, make them look like they're walking across, or put a giant hole in the building, or move some text around really, really fast, After Effects is a great weapon of choice to use.